Hello, my name's Ben Thomas, and today we're sat here in Net Consulting's headquarters in Cardiff. I'm joined by Glenn Morgan, and today we're here to discuss which is better, SD-WAN or SASE. So, Glenn, during the rise of the software-driven network management era, two technologies have sort of come out as the leaders, and that's SD-WAN and SASE. But first of all, why is there a demand for these types of technologies?
Sure. The difficulty with trying to keep up with the way people think these days with older networks has been kind of the driver for a lot of this stuff. So these days, people and businesses think along the lines of, I want this user by name to have access to that application, whether it be in the cloud or the data center, by the same name that you think of. So that's the speed your business thinks, and that's the speed people expect them to operate at. But traditional networking and all that kind of thing is now really low level in comparison, so it's quite difficult to pick the specific address to send the specific port to the specific thing. So it became quite difficult. And when you get cloud services like Microsoft 365, how you address that changes on a very regular basis. You can't even have anything consistent anymore. You now have to keep a really low level updating all that. So SD-WAN kind of came first, essentially. And that was a way of being able to configure things in the way that you think about them. So the whole intent was to try to divorce the actual moving of data around part to the control of what that should look like and how you configure that. So the whole idea was to save time, because a change for some things for a massive enterprise with, say, 5,000 odd users could literally take months of planning under normal circumstances. Whereas the SD-WAN route, the intent was that it's all very, very simple and nice and pretty GUIs to drive it all, so that you can easily say, I want to take that from there to there in the way you think about it, saving a lot of time. And SASE was a kind of superset of it that was kind of building in the background. It's a kind of Gartner coin term. And where that came from was a bit of a merging then of security into the fundamental performance and config of networks. So you're starting to get to the point of saying, well, we need to authenticate somebody first before they're allowed to do anything on the network and then hit the application. So it's a broader piece. And where it's kind of evolved to, especially with COVID, the entire world shifted for that moment. Everybody with traditional networking and normal enterprises scrambled to kind of keep up and allow all that remote access, which is great. And they managed that, but then you had no visibility of all your workers out in the field, out at home, in cafes, And so SASE kind of had a bit of a push, and it's come to be known as looking out for those end users and making sure that in the same way that you have SD-WAN configured, you have an end user configured to say that end user, wherever they are, has secure access to reach these applications, and that's how you configure it in those terms. And the broader part of that is the kind of, when you start to get this hybrid now of moving back to offices, where do you really put your money? Because it's SD-WAN if you're kind of going office to office, it's SASE if you're kind of going user to application.
Yeah, I guess to expand on that, then there's sort of two different use cases really. So depending on a company and how it's set up, one solution is probably more suited.
Absolutely, yeah. It very much depends, where you make your money, I guess. If it's people costs, like say solicitors, lawyers, that kind of thing, you should really think SASE, because wherever they are, whatever the circumstance, they can carry on working securely, and you can see what they're up to, and you have some level of control. So especially people like finance companies who need all of that, plus are very heavily regulated. So they have to show evidence that they are protecting people, not just giving them antivirus, but fundamentally saying if they go into an airport and connect to stuff, that is being secured, and that you have visibility of that actually happening. Whereas firms that maybe are a bit more, say, manufacturing driven, where you can't really have a factory in your home, you have to be on premise, then SD-WAN, especially if you have multiple sites, and especially things like retail, where you have lots and lots of shops everywhere, and they have to be bricks and mortar for people to go to, then SD-WAN lends itself more to that, because you can get those things set up in moments. And to kind of round off the SD-WAN story as well, the other main kind of angle, other than the ease of config, is really the resilience of it. So visibility leads into it nicely, because when you're starting to see which applications are actually being used across it, and you can then start to make clever automated decisions to sort of say, okay, well, now everybody's in the office, now everybody's using Teams. I want Teams to have priority. Yeah. And you used to have, all of these things you can do with traditional network kit if you have load balancers and, clever firewalls and all these sorts of things. But fundamentally, SD-WAN brings it into one easy part, and then allows you to have multiple redundant links, and it'll just handle them for you and nicely bond them for you and sort of say, okay, my expensive MPLS link is going to send all the business critical stuff, and the rest of it is going to go through my cheap back-end internet links. Yeah. If my business critical part goes down, I can prioritize the business critical apps to go with the cheaper links. So you have all of that flexibility going on.
Just driving efficiency, really.
Yeah, it's just that robustness of knowing that no matter what happens, it's going to take 3 or 4 things to go wrong before you fundamentally lose comms in your office.
So we've discussed, I guess, the capabilities of the two technologies there. How do they differ architecturally and in terms of sort of the management layer of both technologies?
Sure. So I'll start the SD-WAN part. A lot of them are sort of nice, internet-based portals. So they're almost software as a service-y type portals that you'd expect that have a nice GUI, easily web-driven, and that helps you configure everything. So architecturally, you could either sort of replace an end device, so like the router firewall switch combination that sits on somewhere small, replace it with an SD-WAN device and plug everything into it. And then have it controlled centrally from a cloud or from your own instance in Amazon or whatever it is. So from that perspective, nice clean GUI, configure what you want, and it automatically sees everything as a whole, essentially your entire network infrastructure as a whole, and will let you merge and configure them easily to talk to each other. SASE takes a different approach because, again, in that sort of changeover from people kind of suddenly working from home and people scrambling to kind of facilitate that, they had all the traditional VPN route back into the office. All of their traffic hit the office and then got checked and then went out to the internet for SaaS services or for internal services, wherever it was. But that's kind of inefficient because most services are now cloud-based, and so you're having to send all of that traffic into your company and then back out again. And if you are legitimately, as somebody will be, looking at YouTube videos to research something or to, do a seminar or whatever, all of that traditionally would then have to, in theory, go into your office to get checked to go back out. Yeah. Now, there are ways and means of avoiding it, but then that opens you up security-wise. So the SASE route was to say, well, don't mind about the office. We're going from the end user, and as far as I'm concerned, the next point of connection is in the cloud. So there'll be a range of points of presence around the globe, typically more favored for America. If you imagine, East Coast versus West Coast is a huge difference. Yeah. Britain, not so much, but there's a point of presence that's got huge internet pipes, and people connect to there. So architecturally, it's the same sort of thing as a central, SaaS-based control element that's nice and clean. You put an agent on a laptop, and that will immediately talk to that cloud area. And from that point is your on-ramp, essentially. Yeah. So it can authenticate you to say, yes, this person is who they say they are. And from that point, they're allowed to have access to these various cloud services or these on-premise services. And you can kind of build them on that route. So that's where things like the zero trust networking initiatives come into play, because you can guarantee that no matter where anybody is or how open and compromisable the link they're on is, yeah, they're going to be secure because you're secured to that point, then you're authenticated, then you're off to see the things you need. And SASE pricing, yeah, as I say, tends to be more for your remote workforce, but that is on a per user basis. So there are ways and means of certainly making that financially viable because it's a service you're paying for monthly. So you haven't got to invest in a huge amount of equipment. Yeah. You can kind of get going. So yeah, it all depends on the value your users give you. You might find a firm with 20 users, but they are so valuable in terms of what they do. Yeah. You could put SASE on.
Yeah, absolutely. I get that. So when is the point in a company when a conversation around software-defined technology should arise? Where do they need to be for it to be a suitable conversation?
Okay. It's usually around, traditionally been refresh time, for example. So people are thinking of a network tech refresh, or maybe revising their MPLS network, because they cost a reasonable chunk. So when you're starting to think about those things, is traditionally when people have done it. But there's no real reason you couldn't just add 2 or 3 cheap DSL lines in to bolster your bandwidth and your resilience at any stage. So when is kind of doesn't really matter from that perspective. The main kind of driver for the SASE side of life, again, COVID has helped push this a lot, but thinking in terms of compliance, if you have to meet some level of compliance, having a SASE solution, one, gives you visibility of what your users are actually doing and allows you to enforce that and say, that's not allowed no matter where you are in the world. Yeah. But all of that gives you evidence. So if you're trying to meet ISO 27K, et cetera, cyber essentials, it's so much easier to have that available, and it answers an awful lot of questions. Yeah. And again, financial firms, if you have greater regulatory compliance, that's evidence you can show to them. So literally any stage. A lot of good advice, I guess, that came out of places like McKinsey to say, after COVID, firms should really rethink how they now operate, because everything changed and everything's starting to kind of come back, but not in the same way. And some firms are never coming back to a bricks and mortar office, and some firms are hybrid, and some firms have to be all in. So the advice was reevaluate where you are now. What does your business look like now, and what do you need for that? So most people, I'd have thought, are probably ripe for reassessing what they need. And do you need the gigantic firewall license, or do you need to push that elsewhere? Yeah. Or put more SD-WAN on because you're having more chopping and changing, or you're having people suddenly move to different offices all of the time that they weren't before, just to cover it.
So should we answer the question? What is better, SD-WAN or SASE?
Oh, in the classic IT answer, it all depends. I think the bottom line is SASE you can use for anyone, and you can kind of get started at a relatively low cost point because it's software. Yeah. And the rest is configured in cloud, and you can get going. And if you have SASE, then you're protected remotely, at home, or even in the office, because you're following the same onboarding path. Mm-hmm. If you have to be a bricks and mortar company and everything you do has to be on a premise like factory or whatever, or certainly retail shops, then SD-WAN is probably the better solution for you, because a handful of users in there and they just do very basic things. Yeah. So my personal preference would start with SASE and work out, but equally reevaluate your network, because for those hybrid and on-premise models, there's more you can do with it. But it's time to reassess how much of that infrastructure you need and how much slicker you can make it run.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Glenn. And yeah, thanks for joining.